Welcome to Working Dragon Mystic. I'm Drake. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the laws of magic. And this is just going to be a brief overview because each of these you could really expand on and probably do a whole video themselves. I will consider going back and doing a longer video on maybe 2 or 3 at a time. But for now I just want to touch on them and give you a quick overview of what they are. Now these will differ from many of the rules or laws that we hear most about today, like the Hermetic principles, the threefold law, karma, those kinds of things. That's not what we're talking about here. These definitely are geared far more to scientific approach of magic, and that's why they are referred to as laws of magic, because these are things that have been observed time and time again, regardless of path, to always prove out true. The main source where these are drawn from is a book by Isaac Bonowitz called Real Magic. I've seen him a few other places, but he's actually the source where I found them all put together and discussed in probably the best way that's been covered. That said, I have researched a lot of older grimoires and found them listed there as well. Maybe not all necessarily gathered together as they are in his book. So I do highly recommend his book, if for nothing other than these. But his take on magic and his viewpoints and what he discusses, I found it really fascinating. So, what are the laws of magic? There are 14 major laws of magic that Isaac Bonowitz outlines, with some of them having what he refers to as sub-laws. So the first law that he goes over is the law of knowledge. And this is probably considered to be the most important. The ideal here is the more you know about something, the more you can manipulate it, the more you control it. And it goes into the old saying, knowledge is power, which is what he refers to as the key point of this law. This law is the first one that actually does have a sub-law to it, and the sub-law is knowledge of self, or self-knowledge. Many magicians would actually consider self-knowledge to be the most important knowledge. Knowledge of yourself allows you to control your actions and what you manifest in the world better than any other knowledge. What a magician seeks to understand, he seeks to understand his motivations, he seeks to understand his strengths, he seeks to understand his weaknesses, so that he can rise above these, utilize these to his advantage in any way possible. The key here falls back to the old adage, know thyself. The second law talked about, of course, is the law of cause and effect. I think most of us have heard of this one, that if something happens, it will create an effect. The ideal here is if an event happens, then if you can reproduce those exact circumstances in every way, then you can actually reproduce the effect. And in some cases, you can actually take the effect and backwards engineer it to find out what the cause was. Another important thing here is that can be slightly diluted, if that's the word you want to use for it, where if similar events happen, then similar results will occur. So it's not exactly the same event, not exactly the same results, but now you're producing a similar effect by creating similar events. The key point to this one usually comes up to be, if you control every variable, you control every outcome and every change. Most people would say that's impossible, but that is the ideal here, and that is what a magician is trying to do. He's trying to control as many variables as he can to shape the world to reach the result he wants. The fourth law is the law of association, and this law is stating that if any two things have something in common, then that commonality can control both of the two separate things, or those two things can control the item they have in common. The key point here is commonality controls. We do see this one a lot in many different things. For example, sympathetic magic, where you're using one thing to affect another thing because of a trait that they share in common. Law of association does have two sub-laws. The first sub-law and I do have notes if you see me looking down. The sub-law is the law of similarity. That like produces like, an effect resembles its cause, having an accurate image of something facilitates control over it. Again, in this one, the key phrase is like affects like. I think we've all heard this one. This is especially in Magick where we'd use a photograph of a person or perhaps a sculpture, or we would use a candle to stand in as a representation via color for money, like a green candle for prosperity. The second sub-law to this is actually what they call the law of contagion. And this one states objects being once in contact with each other continue to interact after separation. The key words he uses for this one is power is contagious. This one's actually talking about anything that comes into contact with another thing, there bonds with it and interacts with it on an energetic level and will continue to have an effect on it from that day forward. Obviously, the longer something is in contact or the more direct the contact is, the stronger that connection. This is why in Magick, the use of hair, fingernails, or the like is a very powerful connection to the individual we're working on, whether it be healing magic or what. That is working through this law of contagion. That connection is giving you a direct line to that person, place, or thing so that you can begin to manipulate it in your magic. The fifth law is the law of names. The law of names states that if you know that which is named, knowing the complete and true name of an object, being, or process gives you complete control over it. The power of a name is often thrown around and often misunderstood and even taken for granted. When you're working with an entity and you're using its name, some entities have multiple names that they may go by, but any of those names can immediately gain contact with it, and the more names you have, the stronger connection you can get. That's why in many evocations or invocations, they go through and they will list off every name and title that that entity has, because every one of those is part of its total name, and therefore giving them greater and greater connection with that entity, allowing them to work with it and manifest what they want. The key words to this one is what's in a name? Everything. This one actually does have a sub-law, which is words of power. And this is certain words are able to alter the internal and external realities of those uttering them, and their power may rest in the very sounds as much as the meaning. The key words he gave here in his book is a word to the wise is sufficient. This is important. This is really where, we speak our truth and we speak our reality into existence. You constantly utter something, put yourself down enough, you're going to eventually feel horrible about yourself, whether it's a joke or not. I myself am guilty of this. I enjoy making jokes at my own expense a lot, but I can fall into the trap of beginning to believe the joke is a reality and not just a joke. So it's important to speak well of yourself, not arrogantly, but to lift yourself up. This is why affirmations work so well. The more you speak these things, the more they take root into your reality. But another thing is words and incantations or mantras. Some of these have a very great deal of power behind them. Anyone who works with the Elder Futhark and the Nordic runes, they've probably heard of a form of magic called Golder magic, where the entire point is you speak the magic out. So you would intone or chant the name of the rune to cast the spell. That would be working out of this particular law. The sixth law is the law of personification. This law actually states that anything, no matter what, can be personified as an entity in some way. a lot theorize that all of our gods and all the spirits of old are personifications of energy or power or events. There's no real way to prove or disprove this one way or the other. What is important is anything can be personified as an entity that takes on traits or characteristics that we as humans can understand. And that's important, because if you can personify something, then you can call it forth to you and you can work with it or begin to manipulate it, because you now have a personification of it, as opposed to an extreme abstract that you don't understand or can't comprehend. This one actually does have two sub-laws, and not surprisingly, the sub-laws here is the law of invocation and the law of evocation. And these are pretty much two sides of the same law, but they are separated. The law of invocation, using invocation in the older term of the word, which is invocation. It is possible to establish internal communication with entities from either internal or outside of oneself, said entities seeming to be inside of oneself during the communication process, being within. So this is where you take that personification of whatever it is, whether it be an entity or an element of nature that you're personifying, or just a spirit that you have found in a grimoire to work with, and you are calling them up and you are working with them and communicating with them with inside yourself. Now, some people will warn that there's a slight danger to invocation, because you're invoking this energy or these consciousness into yourself, and that can leave a fingerprint or change you in some way. And I have seen some examples of this. There is a definite shift when you evoke a deity, for example, that seems to almost be permanent. If not permanent, it dissipates very slowly. So when it comes to invocation, I make a rule. I don't invoke anything until I've worked with it greatly at length, and it's an entity I trust, and it's an entity I want in my life always. But that's just my personal rule. You'll have to make your own call on that. I know a lot of rituals call for invocation straight out of the gate. I'm not going to knock it, because that's a person's practice, and what they do is up to them. That's not my call. And the sub-law of evocation is exactly the same thing, only the communication happens externally, outside of you. This is why in evocation work we hear that we summon a spirit into a circle or a triangle, or we're in the circle and it's summoned into the room with us, but it is external from us. It's not actually within us. It's not a part of us. It's the same as having a conversation with someone else in the room. And that's the big thing. Evocation is an external communication. And again, these are going by older terms. I know some people believe that evocation is commanding, dominating, and invocation is a more respectful term. I don't really know one way or the other. I've not seen any resources that really point to a definitive on one side of this or the other. But I do know when I do my evocations, I'm never demanding or dominating. I'm very respectful in how I approach these entities. I view them as friends and allies. So there's definitely no commanding, demanding, and browbeating going on. So perhaps it's just how it's applied. I know many people do use terms in different ways. In most of the books I have located, including very old ones, these terms are used as in invocation means internal and evocation means external communication. Whether you keep that communication respectful and honorable, that would be your call. But I would hope you do keep it respectful. Number 7 is the law of identification. This one states that it is possible through the maximum association between elements of oneself and those of another being to actually become the being to the point of sharing its knowledge and wielding its power. The key phrase to this one is you can become another. This, I think, deals heavily, really in what most people use evocation work for, God for to form assumption, even what some would work with in possession work. Um, and this is where you do use associations of this entity, the knowledges of it. You invoke the entity and you try to take on its characteristics or traits to where you can actually gain insight and access to its knowledge and power in your craft and in your work. But I have also seen this happen where people do the same thing with others, where they try to really get in to know them and they try to associate with them their mannerisms so that they glean insight into who this person is, how they think, how they move, why they might have done something. You see this a lot with behavior analysis with the FBI. They do a great deal of this actually on a scientific level, because they actually do try to get inside these criminals' heads, figuring out how they think, why they do it, and that's been a very helpful process in criminal investigation. I would definitely say that criminal science is built off of the law of identification. Law number 8 is the law of infinite data. The number of phenomenons to be known is infinite. We will never run out of things to learn. And this one, I think, is what drives me the most in my craft. It's probably the one that makes me the happiest. I'm never happy unless I'm learning something. I make a point every day to learn something new. I'm constantly reading books to improve myself, those kinds of things. I'm constantly doing research in Magick so I can always be growing. And this law states that amount of knowledge is infinite. We will never run out of things to learn. We will always be learning lifetime after lifetime, year after year. And there's always something new. And this is important. Just because you think you have all the solutions right now, don't close off to the possibility that there might be something else, something better. And let us not forget that since things are constantly changing, that means that there could be a great danger or a problem in the future that would arise that we don't know about yet. And then we will have to be ready to rise to that occasion to find a solution to that problem as well. Everything is constantly changing. We are constantly learning. The world is constantly growing. There will always be something new. Law number 9 is the law of finite senses. Every sense mechanism of every entity is limited by both range and type of data perceived. We can't see everything. And this one I find interesting. We are limited by our physical senses. Anytime I teach a class on the arcane senses, which I did do a video on earlier, I'll try and link it below here, but the biggest problem someone has when they approach the arcane senses is they totally expect to interact with these senses exactly how our physical senses react. And our arcane senses drastically differ from our physical senses. We have to learn to perceive things in a new way. Our brain is going to try and interpret that information in a way it understands, which, remember, our brain is a physical construct. So it's going to try and interpret that through our physical senses. Now, it is because of this we can take our physical senses farther. And the better you get at it, the stronger they get, to the point where some magicians say that your senses actually separate from your brain and actually become a part of your energetic body and your soul, and your brain's no longer translating the data. In fact, a neat thing that I did learn was that infants, their senses aren't disconnected at all. They're at a point in development where all their senses are all funneled through the same thing. They couldn't tell you the difference between a sight, a sound, a smell, nothing. It's all being fed through the same source. And I believe this is why children seem to be far more sensitive than adults when it comes to metaphysical phenomena. And I think that developing our arcane senses is just kind of tapping back into that primordial sense. But that's a theory of mine. Number 10 is the law of infinite universes. The total number of universes in which all possible combinations of existing phenomenon could be organized is infinite. Infinite universes exist. That's the key words. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Anything that you could possibly imagine happening, there's a universe out there where that's true. And that's big. I know a lot of people, especially with the Marvel movies and everything, we hear a lot about multiverses and everything. And multiverse is a term I use in Magick a lot because we do see this. And it's one of those things where time, we think of it as very linear, and to some extent it is. But at the same time, every choice that you make, there was a point where you made the different choice. So that branches off in a new universe, a new timeline, a new possibility. So these timelines and these universes are constantly, infinitely expanding. Hence, infinite universes. So, no matter what, there's a universe out there where it's true. The sub-law to this, now I'm putting this in as a sub-law. I don't think Bonowitz necessarily calculated it as a sub-law, but I've heard it mentioned as a sub-law by a teacher of mine. And it makes sense, so I want to go ahead and add it in there. And that is the law of personal universes. Everyone lives in and quite possibly creates a unique universe that can never be 100% identical to that lived in by another. So-called reality is in fact of the matter of consensus opinions. You live in your cosmos and I live in mine. This one gets a little sketchy. Basically, everyone is constantly living in and creating their own universe. And even though they're overlapping, we can never fully live in another person's universe, even though they are overlapping, sometimes to a point where they're indistinguishable. This one I do find as an interesting one. I added it in as a sub-law. Like I said, it's been something I've heard from a few teachers. But you could actually throw this one out, and the law of infinite universes would cover it all the same. Number 11 is the law of pragmatism. If a pattern or belief or behavior enables you to survive and to accomplish certain goals, then that belief or behavior is true or real or sensible on whatever levels of reality are involved. The key phrase Bonowitz puts in for this one is, if it works, it's true. This one I find fascinating because a lot of people, I think, could actually utilize this a bit more. Now, if it works, it's true. Okay, that's fine. If something's working in my practice, then I know it's working and therefore it's true. But someone else may do the same thing and it not work for them for whatever reason. So for them, it's no longer true. That doesn't make it a law, but it does make it true or false based upon experiential data. And in a lot of survival situations, that's what it comes down to. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And my practice is heavily based on results. So this law really takes hold of my practice, because if it's not working, if it's not creating results, that's not of use to me. I expect results, and therefore I expect it to be true. But if it's not working, I'm wasting my time. The sub-law to this, we've already touched on a little bit. It's the law of true falsehoods. And it's a concept or act may seem nonsensical and yet still be true, provided that it works in a specific context. So this is a case where it's true based upon, is it working for you? Yes. But just because it works for you and it is a true fact for you, doesn't mean it's going to work for this person over here, and they may not view it as true. It only seems to work in this context. And the key phrase for that sub-law he gives is, if it's a paradox, it's probably true. Number 12 is the law of polarity. This one I find very important. Any pattern of data can be split into at least two patterns with opposing characteristics, and each will contain the essence of the other within itself. The key phrase here is everything contains its opposite. I think the thing that most people are familiar with that is really embodied by this is the symbol or concept of yin and yang. Darkness contains light and light contains darkness. You cannot ever fully remove one from the other. They both contain each other within themselves, even though they are opposites and seemingly somewhat separate. And this is really handy because I know a lot of people get really hung up on if I have this very specific item, I need it because of its association. But that's the thing, energetically, if something can heal, then it actually possesses the ability to harm within it just as easily. And if something is known to harm, then it can actually and easily be made to heal as well. One of the greatest examples of this that I was given when I was learning was venom from a snake. If a snake bites you and injects its venom, that's bad. The venom is causing harm. You have to go to the hospital and you will have to get the antivenom to heal you. Funny thing is, antivenom is actually made from the venom of the snake that bit you to begin with. It's just gone through a transition so that now it is healing you because it contains the very essence of the thing that harmed you. I've even used this to actually neutralize curses because if you can take a curse and neutralize it to the point where instead of just grounding it out, you change the pattern, so instead of harming you or the person it's affecting, that curse now becomes a benefit and a boon to them. Number 13 is the law of synthesis. This law states, the synthesis of two or more opposing patterns of data will produce a new pattern that will be truer than either of the first ones were. That is, it will be applicable to more realities. Synthesis reconciles is the key words that he uses here. And the ideal here is you're taking two truths. You're taking everything that is true about them, everything that's positive about them, but you're working them together to find a larger picture and to create something that is even better, even more true and more common, even more true and more realities, and ultimately better for the greater good overall. This is where, you take alchemy deals a lot with synthesis, and we're talking about emotional synthesis as well. Sometimes in order to grow, it takes more than just joy. It also takes having to deal with some pain. Law 14 is the law of balance. I've even heard it referred to as the law of dynamic balance. And this law states, to survive and become powerful, one must keep every aspect of one's universe in a state of dynamic balance with every other one. Extremism is dangerous on all levels of reality. The key phrase here is strike a balance. I think this is the biggest one I actually use in my life in all respects, and that's largely because I work with dragons more than any other entities, and they are big on balance. They talk about balance in everything. So, and it's striking that balance, work and play, light and dark, compassion, harshness, no matter what it is, everything has an opposite to it, and that balance has to be maintained. Creation and destruction, they're two parts of the same coin. If something is to be created, something has to be destroyed. Energy is constantly in motion, constantly changing. Positive and negative are required to make sure everything moves forward. So we as humans tend to view everything as either good or bad, and that's the only way that it can be. We're very black and white about it. But the truth is the universe doesn't really see that, and instead it works on the ideal of energetic balance. So yeah, the universe has no problem conjuring up an earthquake or a tsunami to wipe out an entire area if it has a need to. And as horrible as that may sound, inevitably in time, new creation and new life and new energy will take place there. So you have a process of destruction and a process of creation. And in one's life, you've got to constantly keep things in balance. I know a lot of magicians, they'll do work to attempt to start to generate something good. And once they do it, boom, they got it. It's great. Let's go. And quickly it starts to topple over. We have to constantly be working to maintain our lives and maintain that balance in our lives. It's not something that you can just do once and walk away. It's a constant process of building. We must constantly be maintaining that balance. I know, for one, I work a lot. I get accused of being a workaholic, and I actually am. And to some extent, my excuse is I enjoy my work. My work relaxes me. But the truth of the matter is, as much as I enjoy my work, it is work. And I fall into that trap myself because I do enjoy it. But I can also hit burnout real easy because I'm enjoying it so much and I'm doing it so constantly. And that's not a good thing, because if I burn out and take a week off and get nothing done, I end up falling behind. And now I have to work twice as hard to catch back up before I can try and relax. And that's what I mean. That dynamic balance has to be there. So, I hit it hard 24/7 and then I have to take a week off. Yeah, I get a lot done. But then I lose all the progress I made because now I don't want to do anything. So that dynamic balance, it's just constantly tilting on you, and you've got to constantly be working at it. Anyways, those are the laws of magic. And again, you can find them in a more in-depth description in them in Isaac Bonowitz's book, Real Magic. Let's see, there we go. He did a great job with this book, and he does go over different philosophies and ideals he has. And for someone looking for a non-spiritual approach to at least the ideals of magic, I highly recommend this book. I know many magicians and practitioners who absolutely love his book. In fact, that's how I found it. It was recommended to me by at least 15 different people before I bought it. And he is probably, at this point in time, he's the only place where I've actually found all these laws in one place together, well defined and explained. So definitely do check out his book. You should be able to find it on Amazon. I think I found this, I picked this up years ago in a bookstore. I can't even remember where I got it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you found it helpful, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon over there so that anytime we release a new video or I have a random ideal or rant that I decide to post, you'll be notified of it, and you can keep track of everything we're doing here. Also, do please leave a comment below. That really helps us out. We love to hear from you. I do enjoy questions. I do my best to answer every question. Who knows, your question may inspire a video, in which case I will give you credit for it. Anyways, thank you all. This has been Working Dragon Mystic. I'm Drake. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.